Hey guys, and welcome back to day 4 of my Learn Algebra in 10 Days series. Today we are looking at the properties of exponents. Starting with when we multiply exponents, so this would be the product rule. So we should know x squared is just x times x, and then x to the third is x times x times x. So if we multiply those all together, we have a total of 5 x's. So we would rewrite that, it's x times itself 5 times, so we'd rewrite it as x to the 5th. So notice, what am I really doing with those exponents when I'm multiplying? I'm adding them up. Okay, so we'll use that here in our second example, but we have to first start with those coefficients in front. And remember, we're multiplying. So 2 times 4 is going to get us 8 out in front, and now we're going to use our exponent rules, which if there's not an exponent there, there's an imaginary 1. So we're going to add up those exponents. 4 plus 1, we have a total of 5 x's, so our final answer is 8x to the 5th. So when you're multiplying exponents, if they have the same base, you can just add those exponents up. Now moving on to division, we have x to the 5th over, which we should know fraction bar means divide. So x to the 5th divided by x squared. So I'm just writing that out. X to the 5th would be 5 x's multiplied together, and x squared would be 2. Now remember, anything divided by itself is just 1. So we have 2 x's there that are going to cancel out, and notice I'm left with 3 x's. So we would rewrite that as x to the 3rd. Now again, notice, what am I doing with my exponents this time? All right, when we are dividing, we are going to subtract our exponents. So let's take a look at that in another example. Again, starting with our coefficients, but this time, remember, fraction bar means divide. So 6 divided by 3, or 6/3, we could simplify this by dividing both things by 3 to get 2 over 1. Then from here, moving on to our x's with our exponents, if we subtract 2 minus 4, we would get a negative 2, which is correct. That is one of the ways you could write this. All right, and anything over 1 is just itself, so you could even write this as just 2x to the negative 2. However, we do not like to have negative exponents, especially in our answers. We want to get rid of those negative exponents. So you may notice when I go to subtract these here, right, I have 2 x's on top and I have 4 x's on the bottom. So when I do my canceling out like I did previously, notice my 2 x's are left on bottom. So another way I could have wrote this was that x squared on bottom. So really, to get rid of those negative exponents, which we'll talk a little bit more here in a little bit, is subtract them, but then put them where there's more, right? We had more x's on bottom, so that x squared is going to be on the bottom of our fraction. Okay, either way you wrote this, 2x to the negative 2 or 2 over x squared, it is correct. But we like to get rid of those negative answers, so we prefer that last answer. We'll get into negative exponents a little bit more here in a little bit, but for quotient rule, we are going to subtract those exponents if they have the same base. Moving on to power rule, or if we have an exponent to an exponent, if I were to write this out, x squared to the 3rd, that means we have x squared times itself 3 times, which we talked about with product rule. We're just going to add up those exponents. So this actually becomes x to the 6th. So this time, notice what we are doing with those exponents. We have an exponent to an exponent, so we are going to multiply those exponents. Looking at another example like that, we would just multiply those out. 4 times 4 would get us x to the 16th, but we do have a coefficient as well that exponent needs to be distributed onto. So we have 3 to the 4th, which would be 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 gets us 81x to the 16th. So when you have that exponent on the outside, make sure you distribute it onto everything on the inside, and when you're doing it to an exponent, you're multiplying those exponents. Let's look at another example. This time we have a negative, so that gets us x to the negative 8. We also have to distribute it onto our 2, which we could put that in our calculator, 2 to the negative 4, and it would give you the decimal version of it. Or we can remember how to deal with those negative exponents. So if it's on the top of the fraction, we want to move it to the bottom of the fraction, and that makes it positive. So I have to move both of those to the bottom of my fraction, and they're going to become a positive 4 for my exponent and a positive 8 for my exponent once I've moved those down. Now I can multiply this out, right? We already know what 2 to the 4th is. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So we have 1/16. You could also have that as a decimal if you want. And then we have that x to the 8th on the bottom to get rid of those negative exponents. Let's look at another one like that. So x squared, and then it's squared again. So remember, we have to multiply those. So it'd be to the 4th. And then same thing to our y, but it would be a -2. Okay, notice these rules only work if they have the same base. So I cannot multiply these out because one has a base of x, one has a base of y. However, I can get rid of that negative exponent by moving it to the bottom of my fraction. If there's nothing under there, there's an imaginary 1. I'm going to move that to the bottom, and so I have that x to the 4th on top, and then when I move it to the bottom, it becomes y to the positive 2. So basically, if you have a negative exponent, if it's on the top, you're going to move it to the bottom to make it positive. If it's on the bottom, you're going to move it to the top to make it positive. So these examples here look big and scary, but we're going to take it piece by piece, starting with my coefficients. I cannot simplify 2/3. Moving on to my x's, I am dividing, so we're going to use our quotient rule, which 4 minus 2 would get us 2. So we have x squared. And notice I have more x's on top, so that x squared is going to stay on top. Moving on to my y's, both of these are negative, so I have to move both of them. That y to the -3 is going to go up on top. The y to the -4 is going to move to the bottom. All right, now they're positive. 3 minus 4, we'd get -1, or that 1y that we have left is left on the bottom. So we're going to leave it as just y, or y to the 1st. Then moving on to our z's, we'd have that -1 we have to move to the bottom. And now we have product rule on the bottom of our fraction. 4 plus 3, we have 7 z's on the bottom. And that is our final answer. All right, last one of the day today. This looks big and scary. We're using all the rules. So starting with power rule, we're going to distribute that on. 8 squared would get us 64. Then we'd have x squared, and then y, -3 times 2 would get us -6. You may notice there's nothing on the bottom that we can get rid of or really do, so we're just going to leave that as is for now. And then just like with all the others, we're going to start with our coefficients, those numbers out in front. So we have 64 over 6, which I can divide. They're both even, so I know I can divide both of them by 2. 64 divided by 2 gets me 32 on top, and then 6 divided by 2 gets me 3 on bottom, which I cannot simplify that any further. So moving on to my x's, we have 4 minus 2, which would get us 2, but notice there's more x's on bottom, so that x squared is on bottom. And then moving my negative exponent to the bottom so that it becomes positive, I have y squared and y to the 6th on bottom, so I have a total of 8 y's on bottom to get my final answer. And that is all the properties of exponents you will need to know to be able to simplify these out. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe. Also, go follow me over on TikTok. I answer questions daily over there. So if you have any exponent questions you'd like to see me do, go ahead and comment that on this video or over on my TikTok, and I will be sure to get back to you right away. And lastly, my Algebra 1 TikTok curriculum is linked in the description box down below. This is a 60-second video or less for every single Algebra 1 standard. So if you think that might be helpful, go check that out, and I'll see you in the next video.